Jake Morrison stood at the massive window of the transport ship and watched the blue planet grow larger as they approached. Zelith Prime looked nothing like Earth, with its silver cities that seemed to float above purple oceans and 3 moons hanging in the pale sky. He adjusted his simple black uniform and checked his weapons one more time. The Zilithian officials had made it very clear that humans were not welcome in their royal palace. But desperate times called for desperate measures. The past month had been bloody for the Zilithian royal family. 2 assassination attempts on the twin princesses had left the court shaken and their security forces confused. Princess Lyra and Princess Kira were next in line to rule the most powerful empire in this part of the galaxy, and someone wanted them dead. Traditional Zilithian guards with their advanced technology and perfect training had failed to stop the attacks. That was when Ambassador Chun Wei suggested something the proud Zilithians had never considered before hiring a human. Jake had been working as a freelance security contractor for 3 years after leaving Earth's military. He had a reputation for keeping clients alive in situations where others failed. His methods were not pretty or sophisticated, but they worked. When his call came from the Zilithian embassy, he almost laughed. The same aliens who called humans primitive barbarians now wanted one of those barbarians to protect their most precious heirs. The transport ship docked at the royal spaceport with barely a whisper. Zilithian technology was impressive, even to someone who had seen the galaxy's best weapons and ships. Everything was smooth and silent and perfect. Jake grabbed his single bag and followed the escort of tall, blue-skinned guards through corridors that seemed to be made of liquid light. The Zilithians moved with fluid grace that made Jake feel clumsy and rough by comparison. Captain Voss met them at the palace entrance. He was taller than the other guards, with silver markings on his blue skin that showed his high rank. His 4 eyes studied Jake with obvious distaste. Captain Voss spoke perfect English, but his tone was cold and formal. "Human Morrison, you will follow our protocols exactly. You will not speak to the princesses unless spoken to first. You will not touch anything without permission. You will remember that you are here only because our politicians believe your species has some value in protection duties." Jake nodded without showing the anger he felt. He had dealt with worse attitudes from allies who thought humans were too aggressive or unpredictable to be trusted. The key was to prove himself through actions, not words. The royal quarters took up an entire floor of the Crystal Palace. Jake spent his first hour walking through every room and corridor, while Captain Voss followed him with growing irritation. Jake touched walls and examined windows and tested door locks, while the Zilithian captain complained about protocols being broken. "These balconies are perfect sniper positions," Jake said, pointing to buildings across the plaza. "The main hallway has no cover if someone starts shooting. Your sensor grid has blind spots near the private dining room. And whoever designed this place never thought about someone attacking from below." Captain Voss made a dismissive sound. "Our technology can detect any weapon from impossible distances. Our shields can stop any projectile or energy blast. Your primitive concerns about line of sight and cover positions are meaningless here." Jake shrugged and continued his inspection. He found 17 ways someone could get close enough to hurt the princesses if they knew how to avoid or disable Zilithian technology. He made notes in his head and said nothing more to the captain. The twins arrived in the early evening. Princess Lyra entered first, walking with the perfect posture and controlled movements that marked her as the heir. Her silver dress seemed to shift colors as she moved, and a thin crown of blue metal rested on her dark hair. Princess Kira followed a step behind, wearing similar clothes, but her eyes moved constantly around the room, taking in details. Both princesses were beautiful in the ethereal way of their species, but Jake could see the tension in their shoulders and the way their hands stayed close to hidden weapons. "So you are the human who thinks he can succeed where our finest guards have failed," Princess Lyra said. Her voice was musical, but held an edge of challenge. "I am here to keep you alive, Your Highness. How I do that depends on who is trying to kill you and how they plan to do it." Princess Kira stepped forward with curiosity right in her eyes. "Captain Voss says humans fight like wild animals without strategy or honor. Is this true?" Jake looked at both princesses and then at the captain, who was clearly hoping for an answer that would get the human dismissed immediately. "Humans fight to win, Your Highness. Sometimes that looks like animal behavior to species who prefer clean and honorable combat. But animals are still alive when the honorable fighters are dead." Princess Lyra frowned at this answer, but Princess Kira smiled slightly. "Show us what you would do differently from our guards," she said. Jake looked around the room they were standing in. It was a formal receiving chamber with high windows and multiple entrances. Beautiful, but tactically terrible. "First, I would never let you stand in this room for more than a few minutes. Too many ways in and nowhere to run if something goes wrong. Second, I would change your daily schedule so enemies cannot predict where you will be. Third, I would test every person who gets close to you, including people you trust. You would have us live like prisoners in our own home," Princess Lyra said with anger in her voice. "I would have you live, Your Highness. Dead princesses don't get to enjoy beautiful rooms or trust loyal friends." Captain Voss stepped forward. "Your tone is inappropriate, human. You will show proper respect." Jake turned to face the captain. Something in his eyes made the tall alien step back. "Respect is earned, Captain. Right now my job is to keep these ladies breathing. Everything else comes second." The conversation was interrupted by alarms that filled the palace with urgent musical tones. Captain Voss touched a device on his wrist, and his face went pale. Energy signatures detected in the palace gardens. Multiple contacts moving toward the main building. Jake was already moving toward the princesses when the first explosion shook the crystal walls. "Get down and stay down," he shouted as he tackled Princess Lyra to the floor behind a stone bench. Princess Kira dove for cover without being told, and Jake felt a moment of approval for her quick thinking. The attackers came through the high windows, using some kind of flying packs that Jake had never seen before. They wore full armor and carried weapons that hummed with deadly energy. Captain Voss and his guards returned fire with their own advanced weapons, but the attackers seemed to know exactly where the Silithian security would be positioned. Jake drew his simple projectile pistol and put 3 bullets into the nearest attacker before the man could bring his energy weapon to bear. The bullets punched through armor that was designed to stop energy blasts, and the attacker dropped like a stone. Jake rolled to a new position as energy bolts scorched the floor where he had been lying. "Impossible," Captain Voss said as he watched. "The human's weapon work. That armor should stop any primitive projectile." Jake shot another attacker and grinned without humor. "Nobody designs armor to stop primitive projectiles anymore, Captain. They forget that simple things can still kill you." The fight lasted only minutes, but it felt like hours. When the last attacker fell, Jake was bleeding from a graze on his arm, and Princess Kira had a small cut on her cheek from flying crystal. Princess Lyra was unharmed, but shaken. Captain Voss stared at the human who had just done something his advanced technology could not do. Jake helped both princesses to their feet and checked them for injuries, while palace security swarmed the chamber. "Are you hurt?" he asked. Princess Lyra looked at him with new eyes. "You saved my life. That is what you are paying me for, Your Highness." Princess Kira examined Jake's wounded arm. "You were shot protecting us." Jake shrugged. "Just a scratch. I have had worse." Captain Voss approached them with confusion and grudging respect on his face. "How did you know to bring projectile weapons?" "Our intelligence said nothing about armor that could stop energy weapons." "I always bring projectile weapons, Captain." Energy weapons are great until someone has shields or armor designed to stop them. Bullets are stupid and simple, and they work on almost everything. Princess Lyra straightened her crown and looked at Jake with something that might have been respect. Perhaps there is value in primitive methods after all. Jake smiled for the first time since arriving on Zelith Prime. Your Highness, I prefer to call them tested methods. My species has been killing each other for thousands of years. We learned what works. As palace security took control of the scene, Jake realized this was just the beginning. Someone had planned this attack specifically to counter Zelithian defenses, and they would be back with new plans and better preparation. But for now, the princesses were alive, and that was enough. Tomorrow, he would start teaching them how to stay that way. The morning after the attack, Jake woke up in quarters that were far too fancy for his taste. The bed felt like sleeping on a cloud, and the walls showed moving pictures of peaceful forests from a dozen different worlds. He missed his simple military. Cot and bare walls, but the Zelithians insisted their guest quarters maintain certain standards. Jake dressed in his plain uniform and headed to the dining hall, where he had been told to meet the princesses for breakfast. Princess Lyra and Princess Kira were already seated at a table that could have fed 20 people. The food looked beautiful, but Jake could not identify most of it. He sat down carefully in a chair that seemed to adjust itself to his body and waited for someone to explain what he was supposed to do. On Zelith Prime, we begin meals with a blessing to the 3 moons, Princess Lyra said. Her tone was formal, and Jake could tell she was testing him. Jake looked at the elaborate place setting in front of him, with its dozen different utensils and crystal glasses. Your Highness, I mean no disrespect to your customs, but I need to understand something first. Are we eating this meal in a secure location? Princess Kira blinked in surprise. This is the royal dining hall. It has been used by our family for 300 years. Jake stood up and walked to the tall windows that looked out over the palace gardens. Those buildings across the plaza have clear sight lines to this table. The windows are not armored. Anyone with a decent rifle could kill all 3 of us while we were blessing the moons. Princess Lyra followed him to the window with growing irritation. Our security systems would detect any weapon long before could be aimed at us. Your security systems failed yesterday, Your Highness. The attackers got inside the palace and almost killed you. Maybe your technology is not as perfect as everyone believes. Captain Voss entered the dining hall at that moment and heard Jake's words. Human, you forget yourself. Zelithian defensive technology is the most advanced in the galaxy. Jake turned to face the captain. Then explain how those men got past it yesterday, Captain. Did they use magic? Captain Voss looked uncomfortable. They had new technology we had not seen before. Stealth systems that could fool our sensors. And what makes you think they will not have better technology tomorrow? Jake asked. What happens when they bring something you have never imagined? Princess Kira set down her cup and looked at both men. What do you suggest, Human Morrison? Jake walked back to the table, but remained standing. We eat in different places every day. We change the times when you take meals. We test the food before you eat it. We never follow the same routine twice. Princess. Lyra made a sound of disgust. You would have us live like criminals hiding from the law. I would have you live, Your Highness. Criminals who are hiding from the law are still breathing. Dead princesses are just dead. The argument that followed was loud and heated. Princess Lyra insisted that royal dignity required certain standards and protocols. Jake insisted that royal dignity was meaningless if the royals were murdered. Captain Voss sided with the princess, while Princess Kira listened to both sides with growing interest. Finally, Princess Kira raised her hand for silence. I want to hear more about human fighting methods. How do your people survive when they face superior technology? Jake sat down and accepted a cup of something that tasted like coffee mixed with flowers. Humans survive by being unpredictable. Your Highness. When enemies expect us to do one thing, we do something else. When they prepare for honorable combat, we fight dirty. When they think they understand us, we change everything. That sounds cowardly, Princess Lyra said. It sounds smart, Princess Kara replied. Tell me, Human Morrison, how would your people attack this palace? Jake looked around the elegant dining hall and began pointing out weaknesses. I would not attack the palace at all, Your Highness. Too many defenses and too many guards. I would attack you when you leave the palace for official duties. Or I would put poison in your food before it reached the kitchen. Or I would replace one of your trusted servants with someone who works for me. Captain Voss leaned forward. Our scanners would detect any poison. Our security checks would find any imposter. Jake shrugged. Your scanners look for known poisons, Captain. What about new ones made from plants that grow on worlds you have never visited? Your security checks look for known methods of disguise. What about techniques developed by species you have never fought? Princess Kira asked many questions about human military history while they ate breakfast. Jake told her about wars on Earth, where smaller armies defeated larger ones through better tactics and unpredictable strategies. He explained how humans learned to fight enemies who had better weapons or more soldiers by using surprise and mobility and refusing to fight fair. Princess Lyra listened, but her expression remained skeptical. These stories prove nothing, Human Morrison. Primitive warfare has no application to modern security. Jake finished his strange breakfast and stood up. Would you like me to prove that, Your Highness? What do you mean? Jake smiled, and it was not a friendly expression. Give me one day to study this palace and your routines. Then let me try to get close enough to kill you. If your security stops me, I will admit that human methods are worthless and follow all your protocols without question. Princess Lyra's eyes flashed with anger and interest. And if you succeed? Then you listen to my suggestions about staying alive. Captain Voss protested loudly, but Princess Kira was fascinated by the idea. After much argument, Princess Lyra agreed to the test. She would go about her normal daily routine, while Jake tried to get close enough to touch her with a training weapon. Palace security would be on full alert, and Jake would be monitored at all times. Jake spent the morning walking through the palace and observing the daily routines of guards and servants. He asked innocent questions about shift changes and meal delivery schedules. He studied the maps of the building and noted which areas had the heaviest security. By afternoon, he had a plan that would have made his old military instructors proud. Princess Lyra maintained her normal schedule with Captain Voss and a full security detail following her everywhere. She attended a meeting with trade representatives from 3 different worlds. She reviewed military reports in the Secure Communications Center. She had a private lunch in her personal chambers. Through it all, palace security watched every entrance and exit, while scanners monitored for weapons or threats. Jake made his move during the evening cultural presentation in the main reception hall. Hundreds of guests from across the Empire had come to watch traditional Zilithian dancers perform ancient ceremonies. Security was tight, but focused on the crowd of visitors rather than the servants who moved through the hall serving refreshments. Had spent 2 hours in the servant preparation areas learning the proper way to carry trays and pour drinks. His human features made him stand out, but the serving staff had been told that a special guest was helping with the evening service. A simple change of clothes and a serving tray made him nearly invisible to security systems that were looking for armed intruders, not waiters. He approached Princess Lyra's table during the 3rd dance performance when her attention was focused on the stage. Captain Voss was watching the crowd while other guards monitored the entrances. Jake poured wine into the princess's cup and leaned close enough to whisper in her ear, You are dead, Your Highness." Princess Lyra spun around in shock and found Jake standing beside her with a training knife pressed gently against her arm. Every guard in the hall suddenly realized that the human they had been tracking through security monitors was somehow standing next to their primary target with a weapon in his hand. Captain Voss reached for his sidearm, but Jake was already stepping back with his hands raised. "Training exercise, Captain. No harm done." The hall erupted in confusion as security surrounded Jake and checked Princess Lyra for injuries. She was unharmed but shaken by how easily he had gotten past all their defenses. Princess Kira applauded slowly from her seat across the table. "Most impressive, Human Morrison. How did you do it?" Jake allowed the guards to take his training weapon while he explained. "I did not try to sneak past your technology, Your Highness. I hid in plain sight where your systems were not looking. Security was watching for threats from the crowd or from outside the palace. Nobody thought to watch the servants, because servants are not supposed to be dangerous." Princess Lyra stared at him with a mixture of anger and respect. "You made us look like fools." "I showed you a weakness, Your Highness. Your enemies will not. Be as gentle as I was." Captain Voss was studying the security recordings with growing amazement. The human never triggered a single alarm. Our systems detected no threats at all. Jake nodded. "Because I was not carrying anything your systems consider threatening, Captain. A servant with a wine pitcher and a small knife for cutting fruit. Your technology saw exactly what it expected to see." Princess Kira stood up and walked over to Jake. "Teach me." "What?" "Teach me to think like you do. Show me how to see threats that our technology cannot detect." Princess Lyra looked at her sister with surprise. "Kira, that is not appropriate for a member of the royal family. Neither is being dead, sister. Human Morrison has proven that our security has flaws we never imagined. If we are going to survive until we can take the throne, we need to learn new ways of thinking." Jake looked at both princesses and then at Captain Voss, who was still staring at the security recordings. "Learning to think like an enemy is dangerous, Your Highness. Once you understand how attackers operate, you start seeing threats everywhere. It changes how you look at the world." Princess Kira smiled, and Jake realized she had the same determination in her eyes that he had seen in the best soldiers he had ever served with. "Then we will see the world as it really is, instead of as we wish it to be." That night Jake sat in his quarters making plans for training sessions that would teach 2 alien princesses how to think like human warriors. It would not be easy, and their guards would resist every change, but the alternative was watching them die. Outside his window, the 3 moons of Zelith Prime cast silver light on the Crystal Palace, and Jake wondered what new threats tomorrow would bring. 3 weeks after the dining hall demonstration, Jake found himself in the palace training facility. At dawn, teaching 2 alien princesses how to break bones with their bare hands. Princess Kira learned quickly and seemed to enjoy the brutal efficiency of human combat techniques. Princess Lyra participated, but complained constantly about the undignified nature of fighting without weapons or honor. "This is barbaric, Princess," Lyra said as she practiced a move designed to dislocate an attacker's shoulder. "Zelithian warriors fight with skill and grace, not with animal brutality." Jake adjusted her grip and showed her the proper angle for maximum leverage. "Skill and grace are beautiful, Your Highness, but dead warriors don't get to appreciate beauty. Sometimes staying alive requires ugly choices." Princess Kira had already mastered the technique and was working on variations that would account for the different anatomy of various alien species. "How do humans decide when to fight honorably and when to fight to survive?" she asked. "Humans learned a long time ago that honor is a luxury, Your Highness. We save it for when we can afford it. When someone is trying to kill us, we worry about staying alive first and being honorable later." Captain Voss watched from the observation deck with growing unease. The past weeks had been difficult for him, as Jake's methods proved effective again and again. 3 more attempts to penetrate palace security had been stopped because the human had taught the guard force to look for unconventional attacks. Voss respected results, but he worried about what these lessons were doing to the princesses. After the training session, Jake walked with the twins through the palace gardens while discussing the latest intelligence reports. Lord Draven had been unusually quiet since the first assassination attempt, but his agents were still active throughout the Empire. More concerning were reports of unknown ships gathering at remote outposts near the border. The pattern suggests a coordinated campaign, Princess Lyra said as she reviewed data on a reportable display. Someone is organizing multiple groups that normally compete with each other. Jake nodded while scanning the garden pathways for potential ambush sites. Even in secure areas, he never stopped evaluating threats. Your enemy has resources and planning ability, Your Highness. This is not random violence or opportunistic attacks. Someone wants you dead badly enough to spend serious money and time making it happen. Princess Kira stopped walking and turned to face Jake. You speak as if you know who is behind this. Jake had been studying the intelligence reports for days, and a picture was emerging that he did not like. I think your enemy is someone who has fought humans before, Your Highness. The attacks show knowledge of how to counter both Zilithian technology and human tactics. That suggests an enemy who has experience with both. That could be dozens of species, Princess Lyra said. Not dozens, Your Highness. Humans have only fought serious wars against 3 major powers since we left Earth. The Krellian Dominion was destroyed 20 years ago. The hegemony signed a peace treaty and has been quiet ever since. That leaves the Syndicate. Captain Voss joined them from the observation deck with a grim expression on his face. New intelligence just arrived from our border scouts. Long-range sensors have detected Syndicate ship signatures in the outer regions. Jake felt a familiar, cold feeling in his stomach. He had fought the Syndicate during the border wars and knew their methods well. They specialized in using multiple species as mercenaries while staying in the background themselves. They were smart and patient and completely ruthless. If the Syndicate is involved, this changes everything, Jake said. They will not stop with a few assassination attempts. They are planning something much larger. Princess Kira looked between Jake and Captain Voss. What do you mean larger? Jake chose his words carefully. The Syndicate does not make small moves, Your Highness. If they want you dead, it is because your deaths serve a bigger plan. Maybe they want to destabilize the Empire. Maybe they have made a deal with Lord Draven. Maybe they see an opportunity to expand their territory. Captain Voss activated his communication device and began sending coded messages to military command. I will request additional security forces and alert our fleet commanders. Jake shook his head. More guards and bigger fleets will not stop. The Syndicate captain. They will adapt their plans to account for increased security. We need to be smarter, not stronger. Princess Lyra studied Jake's face with growing concern. You have fought these Syndicate forces before. What are they capable of? Jake remembered battles on airless moons and burning space stations where Syndicate mercenaries had used every dirty trick imaginable to win. They are capable of anything, Your Highness. They use biological weapons and mind control drugs and assassins who can change their appearance. They recruit from species that specialize in stealth or psionics or technologies that most civilizations consider too dangerous to develop. Princess Kira absorbed this information with a calm focus that Jake had learned to respect. How do we fight an enemy like that? We become unpredictable, Your Highness. We change our plans faster than they can adapt. We make them react to us instead of following their script. That afternoon, Jake received a message that made his blood run cold. Intelligence had intercepted communications, suggesting that the next attack would not target the princesses directly, but would instead strike at something they cared about. The Syndicate had learned enough about Zilithian culture to know that attacking family or civilians would force the royal family into emotional responses that could be exploited. Jake found the princesses in the main library studying historical records of past succession crises. The vast chamber was filled with crystalline storage devices that contained thousands of years of Zilithian knowledge. It was beautiful and peaceful, and tactically impossible to defend. "We need to leave this room immediately," Jake said as he approached their study table. Princess Lyra looked up with irritation. "We are researching precedents for emergency succession protocols. This work is important." "Not as important as staying alive, Your Highness. Intelligence suggests the next attack will target civilians to provoke an emotional response. This library has hundreds of staff members and thousands of irreplaceable cultural artifacts. It is a perfect target." Princess Kira was already closing her data files and standing up. "Where should we go?" Jake was scanning the exits while talking. Somewhere defensible with limited access points and no civilians to worry about. The old military bunker beneath the palace would work. Princess Lyra remained seated. "I will not be driven from my own palace by threats and rumors. If our enemies want to attack civilians, then we should increase protection for civilian areas, not run away." Jake turned to face her with the expression he had used for giving orders to soldiers who were about to get themselves killed. "Your Highness, with respect, you are thinking like a leader who wants to protect her people. That is admirable, but right now you need to think like a target who wants to stay alive. Dead leaders cannot protect anyone." The argument was interrupted by alarms that echoed through the crystal chambers of the library. Captain Voss appeared with a full security detail while evacuation procedures began for the civilian staff. Emergency broadcasts were announcing that unknown ships had been detected approaching the capital city. Jake grabbed Princess Lyra's arm and pulled her toward the emergency exit while Princess Kira followed without protest. "Move now, argue later, Your Highness." The attack came from orbit with precision that confirmed Jake's worst fears about Syndicate involvement. Energy weapons struck key infrastructure targets, while landing craft deployed troops at strategic locations throughout the city. The attackers showed detailed knowledge of Zilithian defenses and had prepared counters for every standard response dot in the underground bunker. Jake coordinated with military commanders, while the princesses monitored communication networks and emergency services. The attack was not designed to conquer the capital, but to create chaos and force the royal family into desperate defensive measures. Jake recognized the pattern from border war campaigns where the Syndicate had used similar tactics. "They want used to commit our reserves to defending the city," Princess Lyra said as she studied the tactical displays. "But if we pull forces back from the border regions, they will have clear paths to attack other worlds." Jake nodded approvingly. "You are learning to think like your enemy, Your Highness. What would you do if you were planning this attack?" "Princess." Kira leaned over the command table with excitement in her eyes. "I would use the chaos to insert special forces teams with specific missions. While everyone is focused on the big, obvious attacks, I would send small groups to eliminate key targets." Captain Voss looked up from his communications console with alarm. "Intelligence reports multiple small craft detected throughout the palace complex. Teams of unknown composition have penetrated the outer perimeter." Jake checked his weapons and moved toward the bunker entrance. "They are coming for you directly. The orbital attack was a distraction to get past your security." Princess Lyra stood up with determination, replacing the fear in her eyes. "Then we fight them here." Jake looked at both princesses and realized they had learned more from his training than he had expected. They were no longer thinking like protected royalty, but like warriors who understood that survival required difficult choices. Remember what I taught you about fighting in confined spaces. Use the environment to your advantage and never fight. Fair when your life depends on winning. The bunker had been designed to withstand orbital bombardment, but the architects had not planned for enemies who might already be inside the palace when the attacks began. Jake and Captain Voss positioned themselves at choke points, while the princesses took cover behind armored consoles. That could serve as fighting positions. When the first attackers reached the bunker level, they found defenders who did not fight, according to Zilithian protocols or honor codes. Jake used human tactics that prioritized killing enemies quickly over elegant combat, while the princesses applied lessons they had learned about thinking like predators instead of prey. The battle lasted 30 minutes, but felt like hours. When the last attacker fell, Jake was bleeding from 2 wounds, and Captain Voss had a broken arm, but both princesses were alive and unharmed. They had fought well and learned that survival sometimes required becoming someone different from who you had been before. Princess Lyra helped bandage Jake's injuries while Princess Kira studied the equipment taken from their attackers. "These weapons are definitely Syndicate issue," she said, "but the tactics were modified to account for our defensive capabilities." Jake accepted medical attention while considering what the attack meant for their future. "They tested us today, Your Highness. Next time they will be better prepared." Princess Kira looked at him with eyes that had lost some of their innocence. "Then we will be better prepared, too." Outside the bunker, the city was returning to normal as emergency services restored damaged infrastructure and security forces hunted for remaining infiltrators. But Jake knew this was just the beginning of a longer campaign that would test everything he had taught the princesses about survival and trust. The ceremony took place at dawn in the crystal chamber where Zilithian royalty had conducted their most sacred rituals for over 1,000 years. Jake stood between Princess Lyra and Princess Kira, wearing formal robes that felt strange after months of simple military uniforms. The Emperor himself performed the ancient words that would make a human the first alien ever admitted to the royal inner circle. "Jake Morrison of Earth, you have proven your loyalty through blood and sacrifice. You have shown wisdom that transcends the boundaries between species. By the light of our 3 moons and the authority of the celestial throne, I name you Guardian, Prime of the Royal House, and grant you all privileges and responsibilities that title contains." Princess Lyra placed a silver pendant around Jake's neck, while Princess Kira presented him with a ceremonial blade that had been forged specifically for this moment. Both sisters had insisted on the ceremony, despite strong opposition from traditional court members who believed humans were too primitive to hold noble rank. Jake accepted the honors with the dignity the moment required, but his mind was focused on more practical concerns. Intelligence reports showed that Lord Draven had been gathering support among outer system governors who resented the capital's control over trade and taxation. The Syndicate had provided him with weapons and tactical advisors in exchange for promises of future cooperation. The combination created a threat that conventional Zilithian military thinking could not address. After the ceremony, Jake met with the princesses in their private planning chamber to discuss the latest developments. The room had been modified according to his security recommendations, with armored walls and multiple escape routes. Maps and tactical displays covered every surface, while communication equipment provided secure links to military commanders throughout the Empire. Our intelligence sources confirmed that Draven plans to make his move during the upcoming trade summit, Princess Lyra said as she highlighted star charts showing fleet movements. Representatives from 30 systems will be gathered in one location, with minimal security. He intends to eliminate all potential opposition at once. Jake studied the data while considering options that ranged from diplomatic to military. A direct attack on the summit would start a civil war, Your Highness. Even Draven must know that. Princess Kira activated a holographic display showing intercepted communications. The transmission suggests he believes a quick victory will prevent organized resistance. If he can eliminate the major governors and admirals who oppose him, the remaining systems will surrender rather than fight. Jake recognized the strategy from human military history. Bold strikes had sometimes worked when timing and surprise created overwhelming advantages. But they also failed catastrophically when defenders were prepared for unconventional attacks. He is gambling everything on one operation. That creates opportunities for us. Captain Voss entered the chamber with a security detail that now included both Zilithian guards and human specialists that Jake had requested from Earth. The integration had been difficult but effective as different species brought unique capabilities to the protection mission. The Trade Summit location has been changed 3 times in the past week, Voss reported. Draven's agents have been trying to gather intelligence about security arrangements, but our countermeasures have kept them guessing. Jake nodded approvingly. Good. Uncertainty makes planning difficult for attackers. What about the summit agenda itself? Princess Lyra brought up detailed schedules, showing meetings and ceremonies planned for the 5-day event. The most vulnerable moment will be the opening ceremony when all representatives are gathered in the main assembly hall. If Draven wants maximum impact, that is when he will strike. Jake examined the architectural plans for the summit facility with growing concern. The building had been designed for impressive ceremonies, not defensive operations. Multiple entrances and large open spaces created numerous tactical challenges. We need to change the format, Your Highness. This traditional ceremony is too dangerous. Princess Kira looked at the plans with eyes that had learned to see threats instead of beauty. What if we use the ceremony as bait? Let Draven think we are following predictable protocols while actually preparing for his attack. Jake smiled as he realized how much the princesses had learned about strategic thinking. Explain your idea, Your Highness. Princess Kira highlighted different areas of the facility while outlining her plan. We announce that the ceremony will follow traditional format, but we secretly prepare defensive positions throughout the building. When Draven's forces attack, they will find resistance where they expect helpless targets. Princess Lyra studied her sister's proposal with growing excitement. We could position loyal military units disguised as ceremonial guards. The attackers would not know they were walking into a trap until it was too late. Jake considered the plan from multiple angles, looking for weaknesses and improvements. It could work, but we need backup plans in case something goes wrong. And we need to protect the genuine representatives who are not part of the deception. The next 3 weeks were spent in intense preparation for what everyone knew would be the decisive confrontation. Jake worked with military planners to position forces that could respond to attacks from any direction while maintaining the appearance of normal summit security. The princesses coordinated with loyal governors to ensure that key representatives would be protected without revealing the existence of the trap. Human tactical advisors arrived from Earth, bringing expertise in irregular warfare and defensive operations. Their presence caused controversy among traditional Zilithian officers, but their knowledge proved valuable when planning counters to syndicate attack methods. Jake found himself serving as translator between human military thinking and Zilithian protocols. Princess Kira spent long hours studying intelligence reports and developing profiles of Draven's likely allies. Her ability to think like an enemy had improved dramatically since Jake's first lessons in the palace training facility. She could now anticipate strategies and identify weaknesses with skill that impressed even experienced intelligence officers. Princess Lyra focused on the political aspects of the crisis while preparing for her role as eventual ruler of the empire. She had learned to balance royal dignity with tactical necessity in ways that would have been impossible before Jake's influence. Her decisions showed both wisdom and pragmatism as she prepared for challenges that would define her reign. 2 days. Before the summit began, Jake received intelligence that confirmed their worst fears. Syndicate battle cruisers had been detected in the outer system, while unknown ships approached from multiple directions. Draven was not planning a simple assassination, but a coordinated military operation designed to seize control of the empires. Government. The scale is larger than we anticipated, Captain Voss reported during the final planning session. Our fleet commanders estimate at least 50 hostile ships in the assault force. Jake looked at the tactical displays showing enemy positions while calculating response times for loyal military units. 50 ships means this is not just about killing the princess's captain. Draven has promised the Syndicate something valuable enough to justify a major military commitment. Princess Lyra studied intelligence reports showing Syndicate troop movements on several border worlds. They expect to gain permanent bases in Zilithian territory. Draven has agreed to cede entire systems in exchange for military support. Princess Kira activated communications with fleet admirals who commanded forces loyal to the royal family. Our ships are outnumbered, but we know the attack plan, while Draven thinks he has surprise. That might be enough advantage. Jake watched the princesses coordinate military and political responses with skill that would have impressed the best human commanders he had served under. They had learned to think strategically while maintaining the diplomatic relationships necessary for effective leadership. More importantly, they had learned to trust their own judgment, even when facing unprecedented challenges. The morning of the summit opening ceremony arrived with clear skies and perfect weather that seemed to mock the tension everyone felt. Representatives from across the Empire gathered in the main assembly hall while security forces took positions, according to plans that had been rehearsed dozens of times. Jake wore formal diplomatic clothes, but carried weapons that could respond to any threat. Princess Lyra gave the traditional opening address, welcoming representatives and outlining the summit agenda. Her voice was calm and regal, but Jake could see the alertness in her eyes as she scanned the assembled crowd for signs of danger. Princess Kira sat in the place of honor reserved for the heir apparent, while monitoring communication channels for updates from security teams. The attack began exactly as intelligence had predicted, with orbital strikes against communication facilities, followed by landing craft deploying troops at key locations throughout the capital. But this time, the defenders were ready with countermeasures that turned Draven's advantages into weaknesses. Loyal forces emerged from concealment to engage attackers who had expected to face minimal resistance. Jake coordinated the defense of the summit facility, while the princesses managed the broader military response. The fighting was intense, but brief, as Draven's forces discovered that their carefully planned operation had become a trap that cost them their initiative and numerical advantages. Within hours, the attack had collapsed, and loyal forces were pursuing retreating enemies toward their ships. Lord Draven himself was captured trying to reach an escape craft hidden in the palace gardens. He faced Princess Lyra with defiance that could not hide his desperation as she formally charged him with treason against the crown. The trial would be conducted according to ancient law, but the outcome was certain. That evening, Jake stood with the princesses on the palace balcony, watching loyal fleet units pursue the remaining Syndicate ships toward the system boundary. Immediate crisis was over, but the victory had established new patterns that would shape the future of the Empire. Humans had proven their value as allies, while Zilithian leadership had demonstrated adaptability that surprised traditional enemies. "You saved our empire," Princess Lyra said as she watched the last enemy ships disappear into hyperspace. Jake shook his head while considering everything that had changed since his arrival on Zelith Prime. "We saved it, Your Highness. All of us. Working together." Princess Kira smiled as she reviewed reports showing the complete collapse of Draven's conspiracy. The outer systems are already sending messages of renewed loyalty. They see that cooperation produces better results than rebellion. Jake looked at both princesses and realized they had become leaders worthy of the empire they would soon inherit. The shy, uncertain royalty he had first met had been transformed by necessity into capable rulers who understood both diplomacy and warfare. They would face new challenges, but they had the skills and judgment to handle whatever came next. As the 3 moons of Zelith Prime rose above the Crystal Palace, Jake reflected on how much had changed for all of them. He had come to protect 2 alien princesses and found himself part of a family that transcended species boundaries. Tomorrow would bring new responsibilities, but tonight they could celebrate survival and friendship that had been tested by fire. 6 months after Lord Draven's capture, Jake stood in the same crystal chamber where he had been inducted into the royal inner circle and watched Princess Lyra and Princess Kira prepare for their joint coronation as co-empresses of the Zelithian realm. The ceremony would mark the first time in imperial history that power would be shared between siblings, but the crisis had proven that cooperation produced better results than traditional single-ruler systems. The past months had brought challenges that tested everything they had learned about leadership and survival. Syndicate remnants still conducted raids on border worlds, while other enemy factions attempted to exploit the transition period. But each crisis had been met with responses that combined Zelithian resources with human tactical thinking, and the result was an empire that grew stronger instead of weaker under pressure. Jake wore the formal uniform of Guardian Prime with rank, insignia that had been specially created for his unique position. The role had evolved beyond personal protection to include strategic planning and military coordination. He commanded mixed units of human and Zelithian forces that specialized in unconventional warfare and crisis response. The integration had been difficult but successful as different species learned to appreciate capabilities they could not replicate themselves. Princess Lyra entered the chamber wearing the traditional robes of imperial succession. The silver fabric seemed to capture light from the 3 moons that shone through crystal windows, while precious stones formed patterns that represented the major star systems of the empire. She moved with confidence that came from months of making life and death decisions under extreme pressure. Princess Kira followed, wearing identical robes that marked her as equal partner in the new government structure. Her transformation had been even more dramatic than her sisters, as shy curiosity had been replaced by tactical brilliance that impressed veteran military commanders. She had developed an ability to anticipate enemy strategies that made her invaluable for long-term planning and threat assessment. The ceremony began with traditional blessings that honored ancestors and invoked protection from celestial forces. But Jake noticed modifications that reflected lessons learned during recent conflicts. Security arrangements were subtle but comprehensive, while contingency plans existed for every possible emergency. The new empresses would rule from a position of strength that could respond to any challenge. Ambassador Chun Wei represented Earth during the ceremony and carried messages of friendship from the human government. The relationship between humanity and the Zelithian Empire had deepened beyond simple military cooperation to include trade agreements and cultural exchanges that benefited both species. Jake's success had opened doors that might have remained closed for generations. When the formal investiture concluded, Jake found himself appointed to a new position that had never existed before. Minister of Integrated Defense gave him authority to coordinate security operations across the entire empire while developing new tactical doctrines that incorporated lessons from multiple species. It was a responsibility that would have been unimaginable when he first arrived as a simple bodyguard. The celebration that followed the coronation was interrupted by urgent communications from the border regions. Long-range sensors had detected massive fleet movements that suggested a coordinated attack by multiple enemy factions. The Syndicate had apparently formed an alliance with other groups that opposed the new imperial government, and they were approaching with enough firepower. 2. Threaten the capital system itself. Jake joined the new empresses in the secure command center that had been built according to his specifications for maximum defensive capability. The facility could coordinate military operations across dozens of star systems while maintaining secure communications with field commanders. Holographic displays showed the approaching enemy forces in terrifying detail. Intelligence estimates over 200 hostile ships, Empress Lyra reported as she studied tactical projections. Multiple species, including some we have never fought before. Empress Kira highlighted enemy formation patterns while calculating arrival times. They will reach the outer system defenses in 18 hours. Our fleet commanders are requesting immediate reinforcement orders. Jake examined the enemy deployment with growing respect for whoever had planned this operation. The attackers had learned from previous failures and were approaching with overwhelming force distributed to counter every known defensive strategy. Traditional tactics would result in devastating losses, even if the Empire eventually won. They expect us to fight the same way we always have, Jake said as he studied the tactical displays. Mass formations meeting mass formations with superior technology deciding the outcome. But we have capabilities they have not planned for. Empress Lyra activated communications with fleet admirals while considering options that ranged from defensive stands to preemptive strikes. What do you recommend, Guardian Prime? Jake smiled as he realized how naturally the formal titles had become part of their relationship. We use everything they do not expect, Your Majesties. Human tactics combined with Zilithian technology in ways that have never been tried before. The plan that emerged over the following hours would have been impossible without the trust and cooperation that had developed between human and Zilithian forces. Mixed crews would operate ships using combined tactical doctrines, while ground forces prepared for battles that might determine the future of multiple civilizations. Jake coordinated with commanders who represented dozens of species united by shared determination to preserve the new alliance. Empress Kira took personal command of the defensive fleet, while Empress Lyra managed planetary defenses and civilian evacuation procedures. Both sisters had learned to balance political responsibilities with military necessities in ways that impressed experienced officers who had served under previous rulers. They had become leaders who could inspire loyalty while making hard decisions. That survival required the battle began in the outer system as enemy scouts probed defensive positions that appeared to follow traditional deployment patterns. But when the main attack force committed to assault formations, they discovered that apparent weaknesses were actually carefully prepared traps. Human commanders had taught Zilithian forces to fight with deception and misdirection, while Zilithian technology gave human tactics capabilities they had never possessed before. Jake commanded the Central Reserve Force from the flagship that carried both empresses into combat, despite protests from security advisors. The sisters had insisted on sharing the risks faced by their subjects, and their presence inspired crews who fought with determination that surprised enemy commanders. The battle became a test of everything they had learned about cooperation and trust under the worst possible conditions. Enemy forces that expected to overwhelm static defenses found themselves fighting mobile opponents who refused to engage on predictable terms. Ships that should have been destroyed by superior firepower survived through tactics that prioritized survival over glory, while counterattacks came from directions that violated conventional military wisdom. The result was confusion that spread through enemy formations as carefully planned operations collapsed into chaotic individual struggles. The turning point came when Jake led a desperate assault on the enemy command ship using boarding techniques that combined human close combat skills with Zilithian technology. The attack succeeded because enemy commanders had not planned for tactics that seemed too primitive to be effective. When their coordination was disrupted, the entire enemy fleet began to fragment as different factions pursued separate objectives. Empress Lyra and Empress Kira coordinated the pursuit that drove surviving enemy forces from the system while rescue. Operations recovered crews from damaged ships on both sides. The victory was complete, but the cost had been high enough to remind everyone that survival required constant vigilance and preparation for new threats. In the aftermath of battle, Jake found himself promoted again to a position that recognized his unique role in the Empire's defense. Supreme Military Advisor gave him authority to reshape the entire Imperial military according to principles that emphasized adaptation over tradition. It was work that would take years, but the foundation had been laid during months of crisis that tested every assumption about how different species could work together. The formal conclusion of the crisis came with a treaty signing ceremony that established new relationships between the Zilithian Empire and its neighbors. Former enemies became allies, while neutral powers requested defensive agreements that would protect them from future syndicate expansion. The empire that emerged from the trials was larger and stronger than the one that had faced the original threats. Jake stood with the empresses on the palace balcony where they had watched the first enemy ships retreat 6 months earlier. The view now included construction sites where new defensive installations were being built, according to designs that incorporated lessons from multiple species. The future would bring new challenges, but they had proven that cooperation could overcome any obstacle. "You changed everything," Empress Lyra said, as she reviewed reports showing increased prosperity and security throughout the Empire. Jake shook his head while considering how much had changed for all of them. "We changed everything, Your Majesties. Humans and Zilithians working together accomplished things that neither species could have achieved alone." Empress Kira smiled as she watched ships from a dozen different worlds arriving with trade goods and cultural exchanges that enriched the Empire in ways beyond simple military strength. "The galaxy is different now because we learned to trust each other." Jake looked at both empresses and realized they had become exactly the leaders their people needed for the challenges ahead. The uncertain princesses he had first met had been transformed by necessity into rulers who understood that strength came from unity rather than isolation. They would face new threats, but they had the skills and relationships to handle whatever came next. As the 3 moons of Zelith Prime set behind the Crystal Palace, Jake reflected on the message he had received that morning from Earth. The human government wanted him to return home to help train new generations of officers for service with alien allies. It was an honor that recognized everything he had accomplished, but it would mean leaving the family he had found among the stars. The decision could wait until tomorrow. Tonight he would celebrate with friends who had become more than allies and remember how much could be achieved when different species learned to see past their differences to the common ground that united them all. The galaxy was vast and full of wonders that could only be discovered through cooperation and trust that transcended the boundaries between worlds.